Welcome back to Automation Airwaves. Your host, Scott Teeple. Really excited for this one. So we had a lot of great experiences around keeping audit out of the loop. And of course, what we mean there is not that you should keep audit out of the loop, but to not keep audit out of the loop and get them involved in the program as early as possible. And as we think through this use case, and we'll get right into it here, we introduce kind of our guest here, Todd Petmeyer. Thanks for joining us. A lot of experience in helping us over the last several years in the automation program. And as you all know, Kent, he's been on this show several times. Take an opportunity to go back and look at all the great videos that we've done to this point. When we get into keeping audit out of the loop, Kent, if you can, let's just start and let's dive into kind of defining what exactly we mean by this.
You know, the audit stall point is pretty deep down there. It's around 7, I think, and the 13 stall points, and it's something to often think about. So if you can imagine, you're driving down the road, you haven't done anything incorrect, and the police officer pulls up behind you, right, and you're driving down, and all of a sudden you're really paying attention to what you're doing. You're trying to stay within your lane. And this is kind of how audit feels. You know, you get down the road, you've gone to solutioning, you haven't thought about all the pieces that are involved, like design authority, about governance, about how do I set up my COE. You're thinking about how do I solve this, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm having some success. And boom, there's audit going, hey, you're having some success. Let's take a look and see what's going on. Kind of feels the same way. So there's a lot of components, but it's really taking a look at your whole program up front. And hopefully, you know, we'll get, after this Airwaves, we'll get to be able to move that stall point up a little bit higher. But
I really enjoyed the police officer, right? How many times have we all been like white knuckled on the steering wheel, right in there? So this is a really, really great analogy as we think through some of the stall points. But can we get into, you know, as you kind of mentioned, maybe a little bit of the design authority role. We're really focused in this, you know, whether it's a COE or maybe we're just focused on the low-hanging fruit, but really getting into kind of the problem or you know, how we can identify that maybe we're entering into this use case.
We all, you know, often when we talk with our clients, first thing they want to talk about is how they're solving the problem, the tools that they're bringing in, the proof of concepts that they're bringing in, the proof of value they're bringing in. And what you don't often hear is, I'm also following it up with documentation. I've also documented how I used to do it and how it might impact the organization. I'm setting up some governance around it and prioritization around it. Maybe there's an organizational change management piece that they have to now include into their automation program. All of these need to be included when you're talking about keeping audit out of the loop. And really, it's not that you're going to keep them out of the loop, but it's really that you're going to be prepared for when they do come knocking at your door, and you'll have the documentation to push through that audit that is going to happen.
So Todd, from your perspective, as we know that the automation program is kind of out there and it's running, what are some of those, you know, identification or problems that you've seen?
So we had a client about a year ago, Scott, who had automated a fixed asset process, and unfortunately, they made the mistake of not getting audit involved early. So end of year audit comes around, their external auditors come in, and they had previously been reliant on the old control, the old process control. Auditor discovered that the process had changed, it's now automated, and started asking a lot of questions. And then one thing led to another. They had to increase their sample size, which drove up cost, and the client was really in a bad situation, and so had to come to Agilify to help get their auditors over the hump and document some of the new process.
Yeah, I do remember this one as we really started. You know, it gave us a great understanding around our design authority role and how, you know, documentation was so important and how we were able to prove and bring the auditors really up to speed really quickly as they really were starting to understand what is the possibility that's really around this, instead of maybe the typical way that automations really go in or how IT services go in. We start looking at a quality system control, right? A lot of the nuances around an IT system is there within your documentation to really help the auditors around it.
Yeah, and usually the auditors don't stop with that one process that they find. They start asking questions about your entire automation program.
And we have seen that, you know, along the way, and saying, okay, now that we've looked at this one, what does this mean for the overall program? Right. You know, how many is really in here, and are those really impacting your controls? And having a firm, I think, foothold on where your processes are, where your automations are, and really working with whoever is in your internal audit group and having an understanding of how those are impacting the controls is really important. Yeah, Kent, do you have any other use cases that you can think of that?
Well, the use cases vary across the board, but some of the the things that you see that are similar in all of them are, we don't think down to what does the role look like. We've got a human worker that's providing these particular as part of this process in this manner, and the role that they play comes with specific segregation of duties between maybe environments, maybe applications, what they can get access to. And we've got to think about audit from that standpoint as well. We need to make sure that the digital worker has the same types of access, that we do have that auditability back when we go look at the process at the end. So there's just a common theme across most of our use cases that just says, think about it holistically. Make sure that you consult somebody who's been there and thought about all the components that are required, because certainly the auditors will find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me, guys, I'm going to go off script maybe a little bit here, and just how important is it or how early is it important to bring kind of your internal audit kind of into your program? As you're fighting for proof points around proof of technology and getting your low-hanging fruits, right? It's like you've got so many things that you're tackling, and you've got this audit, and you know that you need to tackle it. At what point do you stop and say, it's time for me to bring in my internal group and start doing that education?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you can't have your finance folks or your internal audit team actually on the change project itself, next best, and what I would say is best practice, is to include internal audit on your business change management process as a constituent before you put a change into production. So that's a good point to get internal audit involved before it goes into production.
So it's an interesting, I think, stall point, and we may get to in a later, is around organizational change management or the business change management portion of it. But who should be included in that, and the understanding of, when the process is changing, or maybe it's not changing very much, but it's just an automation that's overdoing, right, or taking it over. It still begs the question, should you have another set of eyes from an audit or from a finance perspective to say, hey, did I have controls on this, right? Does the control change, or do I need to put some kind of attestation or something on that to help really identify, so when external audit potentially comes in and starts looking at your financials, you're not sitting there saying, I maybe I have messed up here a little bit. So that's...
Yeah, but it's important to mention, that it is a stall point that we know is going to happen at some point. So your original question was, when is this going to occur? When do you need to be thinking about it? The H2 report calls out that 10 bot mark. We've seen it maybe 20, 25 bots. Maybe it's about how much value the program's bringing. Maybe it's about the maturity of the program and how your organization is laid out. But it's something that you definitely want to think about up front and early, soon, not 6 months, 12 months, 18 months in. Because as it implies, the stall point, you're going to get to a point where you have to literally stop and backtrack and try to fill in all the gaps that are required to move forward. So I want to stress that.
Yeah, some of the muscle that you learn, right, in the early days, and making sure that you have everything in place.
Right.
That you're not going back into 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 different automations where now you're trying to do your documentation, right? And you're trying to figure out, okay, did I have controls here or whatnot? Getting that documented early, getting it approved, I think is really important. So as we kind of wrap up here, and maybe we start with you, Todd. What advice would you give our viewers on this area of audit and automation?
Well, I think to steal a comment Kent made earlier, as you're embarking on automation projects, don't just think about the technology or the process you're automating. Think about all the things that are attached to it. One of which is internal audit. So it's looking holistically at everything that touches that project.
That's great.
And I just want to expand the scope there just a little bit and not reiterate, but with an effective design authority component within your COE, within your program, hopefully you would have done a risk assessment up front. And so therefore you would know whether this process is automatable or it has a high risk going in. And so it's going to define a lot of the components you'll need to take a look at that you would have normally taken a look at with a human worker.
Yeah, and I think that if you have a well-defined controls list, or you have an understanding of where the focus is going to be, make sure that you have that early and often and in your process to say, as your risk assessment, as you're talking about, where does that really impact, and how do I bring them into the conversation to understand what documentation needs to change along the line. So that is great. That's awesome. So, all right. Well, we'll really appreciate you guys coming in today, and stay tuned for our next Automation Airwaves, where we're going to talk about lack of automation strategy, stall point. And if you get a chance, or if you haven't already, please go out to our website at agilifyautomation.com and take the Automation Maturity Assessment, where you get to learn quite a bit about your own program and maybe where we can help you along the way. Thanks.